you get a sense that you've caught something here and it could be lasting?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm not aware that we've quite reached $1 million yet, but we're getting there. I mean, certainly we are breaking all records and approaching $1 million. And this is absolutely unheard of. You know, in the course of an hour, we're making what we used to make, you know, in a couple of days right now. So things have really changed. And when Bernie, you know, gave his support to Hillary, it was as if there was a subliminal message there that was unleashing his supporters to tell them, keep building this movement. Don't throw away our work together. And that seems to be the message that so many people have taken away, because that very moment he opened the floodgates into our campaign. So we're getting those $27 signatures, $27 signature contribution that are flooding into our campaigns, as if to say this is now the people's campaign. People are signing up as volunteers to help with our ballot drives. It's the difference between night and day.
Really?
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's absolutely staggering. It's a completely new campaign.
You left the Democratic Party over campaign finance reform.
And exactly, campaign finance reform was it was a pivotal moment for me.
Yeah.
And I had, you know, I was just becoming a political person at the time, and I in fact was not a political activist, and I was kind of skeptical about all politics. At that time I was recruited actually by the Green Party just as the Democrats were throwing out campaign finance reform.
Yep.
We the voters had passed it by a 2-to-1 margin as a voter referendum. The Democrats repealed it, having 85% of the legislature at that time. They repealed it on a voice vote, which said to me, the change is not going to happen in the Democratic Party. We're going to have to create the change as people. And the Green Party is a party of the people. It doesn't take corporate money. It's not corrupted to start with.
What do you feel like the climate is for meaningful campaign finance reform? Obviously, Bernie went quite a ways. We had Hillary last week talk about expanding a public financing. Are you optimistic that campaign finance reform could happen, or do you think both parties would never change the system that's rigged for them?
It is very rigged for them. And what I heard Hillary say was that it's time to get unaccountable money out of politics, which means big money is welcome. Just hang your logo, you know, hang your logo on the politicians that you're buying, you know. I don't think that quite makes it with the American people. It doesn't fix our sold-out healthcare system. It doesn't fix our sold-out energy system. It doesn't fix our sold-out corporate trade agreements that are sending our jobs overseas. That's not going to fix it. We need to get big money out of politics so we can get the people back in. And I have no doubt if we had the honor of turning the White House into a greenhouse, and the world would be a better place for it, that would be, you know, one of the first issues that we would bring forward. As a what would you call it? As an organizer-in-chief in the White House, this would be a key issue for me. The first issue that I would take on, actually, is what I think is the gateway issue to all the others, and that is canceling student debt. We did it for the crooks on Wall Street. We bailed them out to the tune of like $17 trillion if you count all of the bailouts and the free loans. But we also bailed them out with this thing called quantitative easing. And there's no real reason why we can't apply that same technique to the students, to the young people. Now, it just so happens there are 42 million people who are trapped in predatory student loan debt. That is enough, that number is enough to win a three-way presidential race. And we're the only place those votes can go. So this is why we feel like this is such a powerful moment, because just by getting that word out to young people that they can come out and take over this election and win it to cancel debt, win it to make public higher education free, win it to create an emergency jobs program, a Green New Deal, that will also fix the emergency of the climate crisis. This is a rather transformational reform, which makes it really number one in my book, because that's how we can win this election. There are very few people I know who are holding student debt. When they hear that they actually have the numbers to come out and cancel it, they want to do that. And they not only want to do it themselves, they want to tell everybody they know to come out and do that. So we have a quorum in this election, and we can change history based on liberating a generation from this debt crisis that has basically wiped them out from the possibility of having a future. This is a national scandal that this is allowed to exist. So for us, this is the number one issue where we're going to basically have a springboard in order to fix that problem and then use this generation of young people who are ready to come out and change the world the minute we break their chains, because right now they're chained up in 2 and 3 part-time, low-wage, temporary jobs just to try to keep a roof over their heads, let alone pay back their debt. So by repatriating them and bringing them back into society, we really enable a transformative force to help lead us forward on all of these critical issues for the future of our society.
What about the Donald Trump phenomenon? What's it done for your candidacy and for third-party candidacies in this election?
You know, I think Donald Trump is a symbol of an unhinged political system. We have a race in which we have a member of the billionaire club, Donald Trump, or an advocate for the billionaire club in the form of Hillary Clinton, who has been a long-term supporter of the big predatory banks and the fossil fuel giants and the war profiteering industry. All of them are getting rich off of our backs, our climate, our jobs, our future. Neither of them are going to solve this problem. I think this race is such a wake-up moment for so many people who basically said no. Even Donald Trump's supporters, as you know,
Yes.
don't support Donald Trump. They're mostly opposing Hillary Clinton. And the same is true of Hillary Clinton, that most of her supporters are opposing Donald Trump. What's wrong with this picture? This is not what democracy looks like. Democracy is not what we don't want, and it's not who we fear the most. It is a moral compass. It is our values. It's our vision. It needs an affirmative agenda. And I think people are realizing that this politics of fear has been a disaster. It delivered everything we were afraid of. All the reasons people were told to vote for the lesser evil, all those things are exactly what we've gotten. The offshoring of our jobs, the meltdown of the climate, the endless expanding wars that are bankrupting us financially and morally. At the same time, they are making us less secure. They are not making us more secure. The expenses, you know, this is 54% of the American budget. 54%. The next biggest expenditure on the budget, very few people know this. After 54% for the military, the next biggest expenditure is 7%. Our budget is predominantly a military catastrophe with footnotes around the side for housing, for government services, etc. If you look at our discretionary budget, that's where the money goes. It's almost half of your income tax that's going to this military. It's $6 trillion, according to a recent Harvard study, on these wars since 2001. That comes down, and that's including the long-term expenses for the wounded soldiers, who we must take care of. That comes down to $75,000 per American household that we have spent on these wars on terror that have only succeeded in creating more terror and more terrible forms of terror. So we need to reboot how we do this. We call for a peace offensive in the Middle East, which would basically start with a weapons embargo to the countries of the Middle East, and in particular to ISIS and the affiliated groups, as well as freezing the funding of those countries who are continuing to fund terrorist sources. And we, of course, have a big hand in this ourselves, because we too have supported, you know, the whole concept of religious jihad was started by the Saudis and the CIA in Afghanistan, and it has come back to bite us in the biggest way. We cannot both fund terrorism and arm terrorism, while with the other hand we are fighting terrorism. That just doesn't work. The only winner here is the war profiteering industry. They are making out like bandits while the world is going up in flames.
I have one more question.
Sure.
So with the Democratic Party's platform arguably the most progressive ever, and with Hillary Clinton continuing to move to the left on just about every issue except national security and international affairs, is there still room for a Green Party candidacy?
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And thank you. I think the American public is not being fooled by this. Hillary flips her rhetoric very quickly, but she's had a very consistent walk for decades that she's been in public service. And, who dismantled the social safety net for poor women and children? This was the policies of the Clintons, implemented by Bill, but supported and advocated for by Hillary, left women and children in the lurch that they are in now without a safety net, who supported the NAFTA that exported our jobs, who deregulated Wall Street. This again was the policy of the Clintons that deregulated Wall Street, leading to the loss of 9 million jobs and the theft of 5 million homes. And we continue to teeter on the brink of the next Wall Street crash, which has not been fixed by that incredibly complicated, 1,000-page bill that is full of loopholes, and the banks are bigger than ever. So it's not getting fixed, and the American people are feeling that. So I think that's why, there is all the room in the world right now for us to stand up, to reject the propaganda of the lesser evil, and to fight for the greater good, like our lives depend on it, because they do. We do, in fact, have the power. We have the solutions. A Green New Deal that will create the jobs that we need, 20 million jobs that will also fix the emergency of the climate crisis, canceling student debt, making higher education free, creating a welcoming path to citizenship, ending police violence and mass incarceration, and a foreign policy based on international law and human rights. It's not so complicated. We can actually do this, and we have the numbers that can make it happen. Just by mobilizing young people in debt alone, we can take over this election and win it for an America and a world that works for all of us. Together we are unstoppable, and we're going to make that happen.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Josh.
Thank you very much. Great talking with you. I really appreciate it.
It was lovely meeting you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you so much for coming here today. My name is Tom Macmillan. I'm the New Hampshire coordinator for Jill Stein for president. So thank you everybody for coming out today. I didn't want to have to pull a Jeb Bush and tell you guys to clap there. So we know why we're all here today. We're here because Dr. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate for president, is here in New Hampshire visiting us for the third time on this campaign trail. We are currently gathering signatures to put Dr. Stein on the ballot here in New Hampshire to make sure that every voter in New Hampshire has a progressive choice when they go to fill out their ballot on November 8th. We are about halfway towards our goal. We have until August 10th to do so. So if you are, most people here have probably already filled out the petition, so thank you very much for doing that. If you are willing to help gather signatures, that means asking your family members to sign the petition, that means asking your neighbors, it means going to a farmer's market, it means whatever you want it to mean, but it's a grassroots effort to get Dr. Stein on the ballot because unfair ballot access laws across the country require us to collect literally hundreds of thousands of signatures to put a candidate on the ballot across the country, and here in New Hampshire we need to collect 3,000. So they just collected 50,000 signatures in the state of Illinois to get on the ballot, which is a remarkable achievement. And we will no doubt reach our goal here, but it will happen much easier, much faster, and with much more precision if every person here took 5 petitions and asked someone else to sign and get on board for the movement. Because that's what we're really trying to build. Elections come and they go, and the government tells us to vote, and we go and vote. But movements make history. And so really, what we are building on is the movement for a world where people matter more than profit. And that's what we're fighting for today. we're fighting for a world where school children can go to the faucet and know they're going to get clean drinking water. We're fighting for a world where you don't have to worry about your water blowing up, and like in certain places where there's heavy fracking. And we know the Democratic and Republican parties will never, ever, ever get us there. We're never going to build that movement on both sides of the So you didn't come here to hear me talk today. With no further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Jill Stein of Massachusetts. She's going to address us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you to everyone for coming out on this beautiful day. Thank you to the UU Church here in Manchester for letting us use your magnificent space. Let's hear it from UU and all the chambers that you do for social movements all over this country. And big thanks to all of you. I want to thank my drivers today who came and picked me up in Vermont. Thank you, you guys. And thank you to all the volunteers. And it's just so exciting to see you here. I've just come from Vermont because we also have a petition drive there. And you know, when I went to Vermont, kind of ground zero in the political revolution, you know, I was expecting people would be very much kind of grieving and brokenhearted and kind of not ready to hear something else. But I found people just came out by the droves, and we were mobbed at our events, just going to collect petitions at the farmers market. We were mobbed by people who insist that we need a political revolution in this country. It is a movement, not just one man, and that movement is going to keep going. So I want to reassure you mainly of two things today. One is that this movement has another home, and that home right now is my campaign and the Green Party. We've been here, really joined at the hip with the Sanders campaign from the start, through our supporters who've kind of had their feet in both camps. Does that apply to some people here, would you say? Yes. And I want to also just express a big, debt of gratitude to the Bernie campaign for making this possible. We would not be in this incredible moment we're in right now had you not done the incredible work that you have done. You have changed the political landscape, you have changed history, and I want you to give yourselves a cheer. Assure you that we are going to make good on all that work that you've done, on all the incredible volunteering and canvassing and phone banking and donating and all that you did to create the momentum and to really change the political space. Because when Bernie stood up, it was kind of like the emperor's new clothes, saying that this political system, is a farce. This political system is a fraud, and it is a rigged system. And when he stood up to say that, I think everybody was so shocked to see that most people actually agree that this political system is something we need to put behind us. And so you've made that possible to see how powerful we are. And our campaign has been here as Plan B. And for many of us, it was actually Plan A, because what happened to Bernie, the incredible underhanded sabotage, really, of Bernie's campaign, unfortunately is not something new in the Democratic Party. And, what stopped Bernie? Bernie did everything right, and your movement did everything right. You were strategic, you had a disciplined and powerful message, you did all of the community organizing and outreach. You did everything right, and we have little, I don't know what they are. Is it mice in the speaker system or something? We'll fix that. Or maybe it's the NSA, I don't know. If it is, you do not have our permission to be listening to this conversation. Just setting the record straight. All right, but we do want your votes. But maybe they're scared of something here. Because we do have a whoa, are they scared? All right, well, I'm just going to talk through it because they do all kinds of things to try to stop us. So we're just going to keep going, like this movement is going to keep going. So Bernie did all this right stuff, and you did all this right stuff. And what happened, you know? Voter rolls were stripped, like in Brooklyn, where tens of thousands of voters suddenly disappeared and were not able to vote. Over, what, like 2 million votes in California did not get counted. You had the media responding to the DNC media campaign, which was to try to shut it down on many occasions, but especially right before the California vote to discourage people from coming out to vote. You had the manipulation of the Nevada convention, which was just, you know, one case in point of how the rules were manipulated to try to minimize Bernie's vote. And then above all, you had superdelegates and Super Tuesdays from the get-go, which created an incredibly tilted playing field. So that all started, the superdelegates and Super Tuesdays started way back with George McGovern in 1972 when a peace candidate won the nomination. The rules were changed so that a grassroots campaign would be at a severe disadvantage going forward. So, you know, there were, well, I must say, there have been many other examples of principled and powerful, transformative campaigns that were really hung out to dry by the manipulations of the DNC. So most recently, Dennis Kucinich, who got redistricted and basically kicked out of office altogether. You had Howard Dean, a peace candidate who was really sabotaged by the Dean Scream. Do people remember that? A totally ridiculous campaign. And then Jesse Jackson, who was taken down when he had enormous momentum with all the power of the civil rights movement. He was winning primary after primary in big Midwestern states. And he was basically taken down also by a PR smear campaign. So, you know, this is why some of us have gone outside of the Democratic Party to really establish another place where we can actually build this revolution. What we learned in Bernie's campaign, I think in real time, is that it's very hard to have a revolutionary campaign in a counter-revolutionary political party. So, we are going to continue that incredible energy and momentum and build this campaign and build this revolution in a way that will not stop. It's not going to go away. And whatever happens in November, our work will only have begun. If we win, and I'll tell you why that is not something to you know, say is impossible. That's not impossible at all. This is absolutely possible, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But if we win, our work will just have begun, and the real fight will be ahead of us. And if we don't win, our work will just have begun, and our fight will be ahead of us. But in either way, so my second point is that we have the power. And I want to tell you how literally we do have the power. Not only that people agreed widely with Bernie's message and Bernie's agenda, and that he was winning every poll against any candidate out there. He didn't win all of the votes because the playing field was very tilted in those contests. So yes, Hillary came away with millions more votes, but on a very steeply corrupted playing field. If you actually looked at the results of any poll, Bernie won it, hands down, because this agenda for an economy that works for working people, not just for the billionaires, for education and health care as human rights, this is what everybody wants. This is not the exception. You know, this is the rule. So we have the numbers. And the challenge has always been, how do we organize those numbers? And we have a different microphone now. All right. Thank you. Thank you to our wonderful audio crew here. This is exactly the kind of problem solving that we need to do to fix what ails us right now, and going on into the future. So here's why we have the power, and why we actually can win this, and why we need to reject this myth of powerlessness. Alice Walker has this wonderful quote that you may have heard, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, but basically what she said was that the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have it, and we're going to use it. And here's one of the ways we start. Right now we have a crisis of predatory student loan debt. Anybody know someone who might be struggling with that crisis of student loan debt? Yes. It's basically everybody of the younger generation, and not only the younger generation, it's lots of people going on into their middle years and more, because this debt now is a predatory kind of debt. And not only that, but we now have an economy in which you can't pay back that debt. And how did we get there? You know, how did we get to this economy? Well, one of the ways we got there was because Wall Street crashed the economy in 2008 with their waste, fraud, and abuse. Wall Street, who told you to basically sign this contract because there would be a job at the other end for you. But guess what? They crashed the economy. There are no jobs. We've got part-time, low-wage, temporary jobs. Those are the ones that have come back. So they tore up this contract around student debt, where the other end of it was you were going to have a job. You don't have a job. So that contract has already been torn up. So we say it's time to forget that student debt burden that a whole generation is carrying around on its backs without the ability to repay it. We say, we bailed out the crooks on Wall Street from their debt. It's about time we bail out their victims, the young people who are carrying student loans. And here's the really good news that few people know about. There are 42 million people who are trapped in this debt, and 42 million is a winning plurality of the presidential vote. Now, you connect those dots, and suddenly you realize that millennials and their friends and other people who are also trapped in student loan debt, we have the power to take over this election and win it. I don't know about you, but I have yet to meet the person who has student loan debt that doesn't want to come out in November and vote to cancel that debt. Who in their right mind would not want to liberate themselves from being an indentured servant basically for the rest of their lives? So this is a very powerful incentive to get a generation that's been hung out to dry to actually come out, and not only come out to vote. I find when young people learn that they can take over this election, they become missionaries for our campaign, because there is only one campaign out there, only one candidate that will cancel that debt, and you are looking at her right now. So just by getting out the word, friends don't let friends stay home in debt. On election day, we all come out, we can win a three-way race just with those 42 million votes. And if everybody in debt brings out a family member, and there are a lot of sympathetic family members out there, we have enough to win a two-way race. So this is a winning issue because it has the numbers And it's also a winning issue because it's a gateway to solving all the other problems that we have. And why is that? It's because the younger generation has been hung out to dry not just on debt, but on jobs, on the cost of education, on the skyrocketing cost of housing, on the climate, which is crashing on your watch, on virtually every issue. It's young people who are the victims of this predatory economy and this predatory political system that has basically made the younger generation the latest cash cow in a predatory economy. So we have a younger generation that has really learned through life experience what it means to be in a predatory capitalist system that's working for the bankers and not for the people. So by liberating this generation from the handcuffs, from the bondage of student debt, we basically liberate the leaders of social, economic, and political transformation. This is what young people have always done, no pressure, but that is what the younger generation always does, is push forward, to push the envelope, to change the world. Whether you go back to the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s, it was led predominantly by young people, or the anti-war movements, or the women's movement, or the Black Lives Matter movement right now, or the anti-sweatshop movement, or the climate justice movement. These are movements that are being led by the younger generation that's not looking backwards. They don't remember the good old Democratic Party from the days of the New Deal. They remember what it's like now, and they are looking at the future. You are looking at the future. So my campaign puts you front and center in achieving that future. And my first act as president will be to appoint a chair of the Federal Reserve, because it's the Federal Reserve that does these bailouts. So we're going to appoint the chair of a Federal Reserve who will carry forward as quickly as possible this cancellation of student debt as my first. And one other thing about that, just to stress, this is not something that has to go through Congress. This is not a battle that we have to fight, congressperson by congressperson, because of the power of the Federal Reserve to initiate what's called quantitative easing. All you need to know is that it's a magic trick that the Federal Reserve can do that cancels debt. And there are various ways to do that, but there's no reason in the world. If they could do that for Wall Street, they can do that for a younger generation that's the victim. And in liberating this generation, we also create the stimulus package for our economy, the stimulus package of our dreams. You don't want these quantitative easing things, the economists will tell you you can't use them very much because they create inflation, which is not necessarily true, but that's what they say. However, they don't create inflation if they create a more productive economy. And what could be more productive than unleashing a whole generation to basically bring their passion, their love, and the skills that they have just earned in their education to put them to work instead of working some low-wage fast food or retail job. Instead, they can actually use their training, their vision, their genius to create the economy of the future. That is the stimulus package of our dreams that benefits all of us in this society. Woo. So when people say, well, you signed that paper, the guilt trip thing about the student debt, we say, forget that. Since when do you throw your kids into the ocean and say, here, figure out how to swim? That's like the economy that we have right now. you need training for that economy. And in the 20th century, we provided a high school education because that's what you needed to survive. Well, in today's economy, you need a college education. So it is the right thing to do. And I must say, paying college education, so debt is basically paying the backlog, and making higher education free is what we have to do going forward. And that is not only the right thing to do, it actually pays for itself. When they say, how are you going to pay for it? It actually pays for itself. For every dollar we put in, we get back $7 in return. This is the research that was done during the GI Bill following the Second World War. Some people may know about this or remember it. We used to pay for college education for returning soldiers after the Second World War. And for every dollar we put in, we got back $7 in return by improving the economy and increasing revenues and public benefits. So this actually pays for itself. There's no downside to doing that. Let me mention a couple other things that we can do with the power of this generation, liberated to lead the way. Another thing that we have to do is create jobs. And we're calling for 20 million good wage, living wage and up. 20 million of them, so everyone has a job. And we call for an emergency jobs program, because for most people it is an economic emergency right now. Most workers, in fact, are just barely making the poverty level, and lots of people don't have jobs. Lots of people are working part-time jobs, so they don't have the income that they need. So we really, the political pundits tell us we're in a recovery, but for most people, it's still an emergency. So we call for an emergency jobs program that will also fix the emergency of climate change, because that too is an emergency that we can and must fix right now. This is not a hypothetical program. It's not like some new great idea. This is based on something we've already done called the New Deal, which got us out of the Great Depression. And in this case, it's a green form of the New Deal. So it not only fixes the economy, it also fixes the crisis of climate change. So specifically, these jobs focus on clean renewable energy, on creating a healthy, sustainable, relocalized organic food system instead of this industrialized food, which is making us sick. At the same time, it's making the planet sick. And we call for public transportation, renewably powered and energy efficient. And also providing for safe sidewalks and bike paths so that we can use muscle power for those who are able to use muscle power on our way to transit hubs. And that's how we get very healthy as a society, when suddenly we can afford to buy healthy food and we can afford to walk to school or to bike to school or to a transit hub. That's how we get healthy, not by buying an expensive pass to a health club and trying to find a place where we have the ability to have recreation. We need a right to recreation that makes it safe and affordable. This is how we get healthy as a society. So by creating this Green New Deal, we revive the economy, we prevent catastrophic climate change, and we make wars for oil obsolete. Because if you have all the clean, renewable energy that you need forever, because it's renewable, there is no excuse and there is no justification for establishing 1,000 military bases in over 100 countries around the world and basically creating a foreign policy that's on hair-trigger alert and trampling on the local people and just creating a hornet's nest of trouble. Why do we have these bases all over the world? No other country in history has done this. If you add up all the other bases, foreign bases of all the other countries, it comes to like 30. That's all the other countries put together, and we have 1,000 of them. There is something really, really weird and really, really wrong going on here. Not to mention that this costs us, get this, practically half of your income taxes go to support this military, this bloated, dangerous military, which is making us less safe, not more safe. So we're calling for not only this clean, renewable energy, it makes the wars for oil obsolete, and it allows us to cut these outrageous military expenditures by 50%. Because, to be clear, since 2001, since the trade towers and this incredible war on terror began, we have spent $6 trillion, that's according to a Harvard study, if you include the ongoing and future expenses to care for our wounded veterans, and that's the least we can do for the wounded veterans that we put into harm's way. So this is care that we must provide. It will cost us all total about $6 trillion. That comes to $75,000 for every household. Everyone in this room has basically put, in the past and going forward, $75,000 into these wars. Have they made us safer? I don't think so. We, took 1 million lives in Iraq alone. That's not winning the hearts and minds of people in the Middle East, to say the least. We lost tens of thousands of US soldiers, either killed or maimed in the process. And what do we have for it? We have failed states, we have mass refugee migrations, and we have worse terrorist threats. They're not getting better, they're getting more terrible all the time. We call for a new kind of offensive in the Middle East. It's called a peace offensive. It starts with a weapons embargo. Since we are providing the majority of weapons and we are arming combatants on all sides, we can lead the way, we can lead the world in beginning this weapons embargo, and do it now. And we can also shut down the funding coming from a variety of nations around the world, but we ourselves are implicated in this, our CIA as well, and our country has been a part of funding terrorist groups, though we call them good terrorists, like the Al-Nusra Front, which is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda that we considered one of those good terrorist groups that at one time we were funding. And we know that the armaments that we supply, like to Saudi Arabia, for example, $100 billion in weapons. These weapons don't just stay with Saudi Arabia. Hillary Clinton herself recognized in a leaked State Department memo that the Saudis are the #1 supporter and funder of global Sunni jihadi terror around the world. And here we are arming the Saudis so they can make whatever trouble they want with this $100 billion in weapons. The problem is we have a foreign policy which is basically, it doesn't make sense for anyone except the war profiteers. This is a marketing strategy for the war profiteers. So we call for freezing the funding, actually freezing the bank accounts of any country that is continuing to fund terrorist groups. And while we're at it, we call for a foreign policy that's based no longer on military and economic domination, but instead based on human rights, international law, and diplomacy, period. So that means no more weapons weapons sales to the Saudis. No more funding to the Netanyahu government we're spending $8.5 million a day for a government that is systematically violating human rights and committing war crimes and a bunch of other really regrettable and sad things to do. Not that there aren't violations on both sides, of course there always are, but the violations by the Israeli government have all the support of $8.5 million a day. So this is just like, this is off the charts, and this is absolutely unconscionable, the slaughter that's going on on behalf of the Israeli troops in Palestine right now, the occupations, the assassinations, and so on. This is just not tenable. So we call for an even-handed policy. We're not just calling out Israel, we're also calling out Egypt, and we're calling out Saudi Arabia and what they have done in Yemen, which is also inexcusable and brutal, and something that we should not be enabling by providing Saudi Arabia with the weapons that they are using for war crimes. So, unfortunately, this has become the rule of foreign policy, not the exception. So, this is the elephant in the room, and our campaign will not be quiet about it, because we cannot solve the crisis that we are facing until we change our foreign policy. We end this foreign policy based on military and economic domination, and we make it about international law. So let's see, I'm getting a signal. What was that?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. So, what was that? Domestic, great. So let me say a few words about Black Lives Matter and this crisis of police violence. And it's not just police violence. This is really a crisis of racism, which is pervasive. Because, let's face it, we were founded on the institution of slavery, a criminal institution. Yes, we had an Emancipation Proclamation, but that was followed by lynchings, which were then followed by Jim Crow, followed by redlining and segregation, and then a targeted war on drugs, which became a war on Black and brown communities. And then this crisis of police violence, which is not new. What's new here is cell phones that can record it. And yes. We're looking at a crisis of violence that really involves us all. So, we have violence against African Americans, which is off the charts and which is actually increasing. There have been more deaths at the hands of police this year than the year before. So we need to fix this. We really need to address this crisis of racism. And it's blowing back at the police themselves. And that's what happened in Dallas. So this is part of a continuum of this toxic mix of racism, violence, and pervasive weapons. So we need to address it on all fronts. And we call for, there are a number of solutions that can be implemented right now. They came out of the Ferguson Commission, for example, that said, we need for communities to control their police, not for police to control their communities. So, that's not rocket science. That's not so hard to do. That means we need civilian review boards, police review boards by civilians, so that we, the people, are in charge. We can hire and fire our police commissioners so that they are accountable to us. It means we need full-time investigators that are accessible and available. You don't need a miracle from the Department of Justice in order to investigate every death at the hands of police and in police custody. We deserve to know that we have reliable and trustworthy police, which most are, but there are a lot of bad apples, and there is a culture of violence that unfortunately has permeated many of our police departments as they have been militarized and as people come out of the military and they rotate back in. So we really need to change the culture of policing. You can look at Richmond, California, which has had a green mayor for most of the past decade, Gail McLaughlin, who's a wonderful example of what you can do in local office as a green, accountable only to the people and not to the profiteers. And what she did, together with a progressive city council, was create a totally different culture of policing, and where they really taught nonviolent tactics and de-escalation. They haven't yet disarmed their police, and this is also something we need to think about. This sounds really crazy, but in fact, what you look at in police departments around the world where they have put away their weapons, they're actually much safer because they cease to become targets and people stop shooting out of fear. So it turns out where there are nonviolent, disarmed police forces, we're all safer as communities. So we need to seriously look at that. Let me say a quick word also about health care, because that too is in a state of crisis, which is inexcusable and which is a national scandal. That we deserve to have health care as a human right. We could have it right now by patching up Medicare, because it's had some holes knocked into it. We need to put Medicare back together, and then we need to just drop the age of eligibility down to the moment of conception. And from cradle to grave. And that means your mental health, it means your eyeglasses, it means your hearing aid, it means your pharmaceuticals, it means your reproductive health care. We come as a whole package. My background, you may not be aware, I'm a physician, I'm not a politician. I'm actually now, I used to practice clinical medicine, now I practice political medicine, because it's the mother of all illnesses. But I'll tell you, you don't go to your doctor or to your nurse or your chiropractor or whatever and you say, just take care of my left kidney and forget about the rest of me. We're whole people. We come as a whole package. We need whole health care that we deserve, and we can afford it. We save so much money by moving to a single-payer system that we can just put those profits into health care, not into profiteering and CEO profits and advertising campaigns. Just by dedicating healthcare dollars to healthcare, for the same costs we're paying right now, we can cover everyone comprehensively, and we can rearrange those costs so that they are distributed progressively. We need the billionaires and the millionaires to be kicking in what they are capable of. We need a progressive system of taxation across the board, but including for healthcare as well. Thank you. I could say a lot more, but I want to be sure we have time for back and forth. So what I'll conclude by saying, this is a totally historic moment. Whoever would have thought we'd have gotten here in our lifetime? I know there are a lot of people out there that have been working on the social issues, and the social causes and the social movements for a long time. There are others who are very new to this. And I think very few of us thought that things would move so quickly as they are right now. And in a nutshell, we can have an America and a world that works for all of us. The critical ingredient is that we stand up and we demand nothing less than that world. That means voting for what we believe, not against what we fear. That politics of fear, when you look at it, you can go back to Bush and Nader Gore for a long time, and even before that, we've been told, don't vote for what you really want, vote for the lesser evil. Well, that has a track record. This politics of fear, what did we get? We got everything we were afraid of by voting our fears. In fact, all the reasons we were told to vote for the lesser evil, because you didn't want the offshoring of our jobs, you didn't want the down pressure on our wages, you didn't want the meltdown of the climate, you didn't want massive bailouts for Wall Street, you didn't want a healthcare system that's pricing us out of healthcare, you didn't want an expanding criminal prison state system. You didn't want expanding student debt. You didn't want the attack on immigrants and on immigrant rights. That's exactly what we've gotten by allowing ourselves to be silenced and by allowing a lesser evil political party or series of them to speak for us. Democracy needs a moral compass. It doesn't live in a vacuum. Democracy is not what we don't want. Democracy is not figuring out who we're most afraid of. Democracy is our affirmative agenda of what we need for an America and a world that works for all of us. So we say the clock is ticking. Yes. We have to be that moral compass, and we have to do it now. The clock is ticking on the climate. We don't have so much longer. We just heard from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, a couple weeks ago. They were at a conference of insurance companies, and they said, the senior scientists from NOAA said they had just received an oh my God report from Antarctic, saying that we could have as much as 9 feet of sea level rise by 2050 on the trajectory that we're on. Anybody plan to be here in 2050? I think a few people. I plan to be here. All of us should be here, and many of us will, and our children will. We can't say goodbye to the world in 2050. 9 feet of sea level is not a sustainable hit. It means goodbye Manhattan, Florida, the country of Bangladesh, population centers all over the world. When Pearl Harbor was bombed in the Second World War, we lost one harbor. Well, right now, we're looking at losing all harbors and all population centers in our lifetimes on the trajectory we're on. And it wasn't just NOAA that said this, it was also Jim Hansen, the foremost climate scientist, who said that about a year before in his study. So the science is pretty clear now that we are on a trajectory over the waterfall right now, which is why we don't want to just sit here. We also don't want to sit here on nuclear weapons, because we've got, a Democratic Party that withdrew under Bill Clinton from the major nuclear disarmament framework under the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. And then you have Barack Obama and the Democrats, who have gone all out now on a $1 trillion program for new nuclear weapons and new modes of delivery, basically creating a whole new nuclear arms race. The clock is ticking on that one. The clock is ticking on these wars that know no end, that are getting bigger all the time. And by the way, when an emergency was declared after Pearl Harbor was bombed, you know how long it took us to transform the economy? We had an economy that was 0% ready for a wartime footing. It took 6 months to transform the economy, to go from 0 to 60, full speed ahead in a wartime economy. Unfortunately, we never got off of that wartime economy. It's time for us to transform, and we call for 100% wind, water, and sun by 2030. 15 years, we can do it. It's about standing up for it, it's about voting for it, it's about working for it, it's about getting us on the ballot here in New Hampshire, and making sure that the American people have another choice. And I tell you, it's really easy to collect signatures. You go up to people and you say, would you like to get a candidate on the ballot who's not Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? You go up to people who look like they might be under 40 or under 30, and you say, would you like to get a candidate on the ballot running for president who will cancel student debt? And that's another sure signature. So it's easy to do. This is what we can do, and this is our moment. And this is the time when we stand up and we stand together and we reject the lesser evil and that propaganda campaign. Like Alice Walker said, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We are going to use that power. We are going to reject that propaganda of lesser evil. We are going to fight for the greater good, not the lesser evil, the greater good, like our lives depend on it.
in this race flip the vote. Not split the vote, but flip the vote. We tripled our numbers in the last 5 weeks or so. We went from 2% in the polls to now 5, 6, and 7% in the polls, even before the corporate media gave us a moment of coverage. How's that happening? I think it's happening because word is getting out among millennials that we can cancel that debt, and I think the word is really getting out in the Bernie campaign that this campaign lives on. It is a movement, not a trend. Thank you so much to everyone who brought us to this incredibly powerful moment that we're in right now. So we have the power to create an America and a world that works for all of us. That power is not just in our hopes, it's not just in our dreams, it's right here and now in this room. We have the power, it is in our hands. Together we are unstoppable. Let's make it so. Thank you.